I have been married twice in my life. The first time I was 29 years old, standing at the end of an aisle in a white-walled church in Columbus, Ohio, watching the woman I loved walk toward me in a dress she had spent 4 months choosing. Her name was Claire. She was crying before she even reached me. Happy tears, I thought, the kind that come when something finally feels right. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I didn't find out how wrong until 10 years, 3 months, and 11 days later. And what I found out didn't just end my marriage. It rewrote everything I thought I knew about the previous decade of my life. Let me start at the beginning. Claire and I met through mutual friends at a going-away party for someone neither of us stayed close with. She was finishing her master's degree in architecture. I was working for my father's construction company, learning the business from the ground up. We had enough in common to talk for 3 hours at that party, and enough differences to make those 3 hours interesting. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I proposed in the kitchen of our first apartment with no ring yet because I wanted her to choose it herself, which she later said was either the most romantic or the least romantic thing a man had ever done for her, depending on her mood when she told the story. We got engaged on a Tuesday night eating leftover pasta. We got married 14 months later in that white church. The first few years were good, not perfect, no marriages, but good in the ways that matter. We bought a house. We talked about kids without ever quite committing to a timeline. We built routines. We had friends over on weekends. We argued sometimes about money, sometimes about time, sometimes about nothing, normal things, marriage things. Around year 4, something shifted. I couldn't name it then, and I'm not sure I can name it now. She became, distant isn't quite the right word, more like carefully present, like she was performing the role of wife rather than simply being one. I noticed it, but told myself I was imagining things, told myself that long-term relationships naturally found a quieter gear, and that quiet wasn't the same as wrong. I kept telling myself that for 6 more years. The thing that finally broke it open wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no strange number on a phone bill. It was a box. Claire's mother passed away in the spring of our 10th year. It was expected. She'd been sick for a long time, but expected loss doesn't mean easy loss. Claire took it hard. I took time off work to be with her. We flew to her hometown, handled the arrangements, spent 2 weeks clearing out her mother's house. On the last day, in the back of a closet in the guest bedroom, we found 3 boxes of Claire's old things: yearbooks, childhood photos, letters. Claire went through the first 2 boxes herself and set them aside to ship home. The 3rd box she opened, looked inside briefly, and then closed and set it with the other boxes without a word. I didn't think anything of it at the time. People go quiet during grief. I gave her space. 6 weeks later, I was looking for a folder in our home office and found the 3rd box tucked behind a filing cabinet. Claire was at work. I had no particular reason to open it. I almost didn't. I opened it. The top layer was innocuous, more childhood photos, a few old birthday cards, but underneath those, carefully wrapped in a cloth, was a bundle of letters. Maybe 40 of them, tied with a rubber band that had dried and cracked with age. The envelopes had no return address. They were addressed to a P.O. box I didn't recognize and handwriting I didn't recognize, sent to Claire's mother's house. I told myself not to open them. I opened them. The letters spanned 7 years. The first was dated 3 months before Claire and I met at that party. The last was dated 14 months after our wedding. They were love letters, not vague, romantic love letters, detailed ones, letters full of specific memories, specific conversations, specific plans. Letters from a man named Owen who had clearly been deeply, completely in love with my wife for years before I ever met her, and based on the dates, for more than a year after she married me. I read every single one of them sitting on the floor of our home office. I learned things I was never supposed to know. I learned that Claire and Owen had been together for 3 years before she met me. I learned that Owen had wanted to marry her and that she had told him she wasn't ready. I learned that when she started dating me, she had told Owen it was nothing serious. I learned that she had continued seeing Owen on and off for the entire 2 years Claire and I dated. I learned that when I proposed, Owen had written her a letter begging her to choose him instead. And I learned from the last letter, the one dated 14 months into our marriage, that she hadn't stopped. Not completely, not until Owen eventually ended it himself in a final letter that was not in the box because Claire had apparently kept it somewhere else or destroyed it. I sat on that floor for a long time. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in those hours. It wasn't just anger, it was something more disorienting than anger. It was the sensation of watching a building you've lived in for years suddenly become a stage set, realizing the walls aren't solid, the rooms aren't real, and everything you did inside that space was performed for an audience you didn't know was there. Every conversation I replayed differently now. Every trip she had taken, every night she had come home quiet, and I had assumed work stress. Every time I had thought she was crying at a movie and she had turned her face away. The tears at our wedding. I thought about those tears for a long time. She hadn't been crying because something finally felt right. She had been crying because she was saying goodbye to something else. I did not confront her that evening. I put the letters back exactly as I had found them, wrapped in the cloth in the box behind the filing cabinet. I went to bed before she got home from work. I lay in the dark and listened to her move through the house and thought about 10 years and about a man named Owen and about a party where two strangers had talked for 3 hours and one of them had been lying from the very first sentence. I spent the next 2 weeks making decisions. I want to be clear about what I decided and why I decided not to confront Claire about the letters. Not because I forgave her, I want to be precise about that, but because I understood something after 2 weeks of thinking. A confrontation would give her the opportunity to shape the narrative, to explain, to contextualize, to make it about my reaction to the discovery rather than about the thing itself. I had watched that happen to other men. I was not going to let it happen to me. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I found Owen. It wasn't difficult. The letters were detailed enough that I knew his last name, his general field of work, and the city he had been living in when the correspondence ended. LinkedIn did the rest. He was 41 now, an architect, which I thought was either a coincidence or something Claire had always had a type for. He was living in Portland. He was not married. I sent him a message. I introduced myself. I told him I had found the letters and that I had questions he was the only person who could answer. He responded within an hour. We spoke on the phone for 2 hours that night while Claire slept in the next room. Owen was not what I had expected. He was quiet, careful with his words, clearly still carrying something heavy. He confirmed everything the letters had told me and filled in gaps I hadn't known existed. He told me one thing I had not found in the letters. He told me that Claire had contacted him 8 months ago after 10 years of silence. After her mother got sick, she had reached out, he said, to talk about old times, about her mother, about things she was processing. He had not responded. He told me this without satisfaction, without drama, just as a fact he thought I deserved to know. 8 months ago was 2 months before her mother died. 4 months before we found those boxes in that closet. She had known those letters existed. She had known we would find them. She had reached out to Owen before we even made that trip. I've thought about what that means for a long time, and I still don't have a clean answer. Did she want to be found out? Was she trying to reconnect with Owen before the letters disappeared? Was she trying to get ahead of something she knew was coming? I don't know. I may never know. What I know is this: I filed for divorce 6 weeks after that phone call with Owen. I did not tell Claire what I had found. I told her only that I was done and that I would not be explaining myself further. My attorney told her attorney what I had found in the precise legal language that such things require, and that was the end of any discussion. The divorce was finalized last November. I am 39 years old. I have been married twice. The second marriage, the one I'm in now, is to a woman named Rachel who knows this entire story, every detail of it, because I told her before our first date was over. I told her because I had learned what happens when people keep things from each other in the place where trust is supposed to live. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then she said, "That must have been a very long 2 hours on the floor." It was, but I got up. That's the part nobody tells you about this kind of thing. The box, the letters, the floor, the phone call, the attorney, the finalized paperwork. None of that is the end of the story. The end of the story is getting up off the floor and deciding what you're going to do with what you now know. I got up and I stopped asking why she cried at our wedding. Some questions. Once you understand them well enough, stop needing answers.